Even though Donald Trump says the Iranian Navy has been completely destroyed, we can see what is called the Mosquito fleet with ultra-fast patrol boats. So for those who don't know what the Mosquito fleet is, what exactly is it?
In fact, it's hundreds and hundreds of small vessels that we're seeing, which are actually boats just a few meters long and can go out by the dozens at the same time, potentially to fire missiles for some of them. So these are generally unguided missiles, so it's a kind of bazooka that shoots straight ahead, and then you're not necessarily forced because they can come out of tunnels from a house that looks completely ordinary. In fact, there are dozens of boats hidden underneath, and then there are others that are simply fishing boats. On the outside, it's a fishing boat. You see a fishing boat in a port, and there are certainly hundreds of them. You're not going to destroy all the fishing boats in the port, while in fact they're camouflaged underneath. There's a fast boat like that one.
How do you explain that a country like the United States could have underestimated the possibility that Iran could hold out in the long term?
The resilience of the Iranians, but under the control of Xavier, there is always an overestimation of the effectiveness of air power. It's believed that the advantage of air power is obviously that it's not too dangerous for the aggressor. With strikes, you're going to fight the war and win it with technology and aircraft. But I don't know many examples. In fact, I don't know any, except for the use of nuclear weapons against Japan, where a war has been won solely by air power. I think we're in that situation again.
Is Gerard Rao right that you eventually need to change your strategy?
The American doctrine assumes they can get almost anything through air power, which can break any opposing will. And the second problem is Donald Trump, who announces every day that it's done, they've won, they're going to collapse. In fact, they've already collapsed. In fact, they've accepted the Detroit deal. In fact, they're going to give us their nuclear program. So he's in a kind of schizophrenia where he believes that what he wishes for is the reality on the ground. He thought that by decapitating.
That even caused damage, Xavier Stelman.
It caused damage, but not enough to bring down the regime. The 150,000 Revolutionary Guards, did they just vanish? Were they all killed? Are the 30,000 poor opponents who were killed 2 months ago back again, present, trying to topple this regime?
For someone who doesn't know anything about this, targeted strikes with on-the-ground intelligence wouldn't be enough, you're saying, to kill those people?
Targeted strikes require, in addition, having a ground force that can support a regime change, since that's ultimately what they want to achieve, even if they say they don't want this regime change.
You have to,
at the very least, enough pressure on the regime so that they give up the nuclear program, ballistic missiles, and their proxies throughout the region. But today, it's clearly not with airstrikes that they're going to do it. The only consequence, and I've said this from the beginning, is that eventually, if this regime manages to stay in power, it's going to turn into another North Korea. North Korea no longer has any economic means to run schools, social programs, or pensions. It has nothing left except ballistic and nuclear capabilities. And so that's what Iran is going to do. But first, a quick word from our partner who helps make these videos possible. And our partner today is Odoo, the universal platform for entrepreneurs, small and medium-sized businesses, and anyone with a project. Odoo, first of all, is a complete ERP, meaning it offers a whole range of applications to support entrepreneurs in their daily tasks. Whether you're running a small shop with inventory, managing invoicing, projects, organizing team tasks, or even creating a website, there is an application for every need, and today we're going to talk about the Signature app. It's ideal for those who need to have documents signed online. You can customize the document, simply select and drag the fields you want, make them mandatory or not, and add one or more signers. And you can set the signing order if needed and schedule automatic reminders. And you send the document in just a few clicks. Electronic signature certificates are recognized in over 100 countries. So whether you're an industrial SME, a large corporation, or you're self-employed, in any case, Odoo is made for you, no matter your industry or the country you're watching us from. Plus, the first application is completely free and without any time limit, including unlimited support and hosting. And starting from the second application, whether you use 2 or 50, the subscription starts at 19.90 euros per month, and that's guaranteed. So, follow the link. Save time, save money, and simplify your life. Then focus on your core business, grow your company, instead of wasting time on administrative tasks. Let's go. We're getting back to our topic.
What about American power on the ground? Since, as we can see, the Americans are trying to reassure international public opinion, always with Apache helicopters and Reaper drones, that's enough.
So that's enough to maintain pressure, to prevent the Iranians from going out with oil tankers. It prevents the Iranians from redeploying their naval forces or launching any drones they may have, since they have, among others, Chinese drones, etc. But in this case, it's not with this patrol that they can make the regime bend in its very existence.
But for the Strait, is that enough to make them back down in the Strait or not?
It prevents them from getting out. So there's a double blockade, and the double blockade, we see that it doesn't stop the Iranians from continuing to prevent civilian ships from trying to leave. So there's still this economic problem that affects all the United States allies in the area and all of Asia, which mostly depends on this oil.
If I may, that's the paradox. Xavier is right. The Americans are actually strengthening the blockade on Iran to make it even more effective. But the goal of Iran is obviously the collapse of the global economy. So they're actually helping the Iranians. The question is, who will be able to endure the most suffering?
The longest.
The longest. And I would tend to think that the Iranians, under an authoritarian regime, even a regime radicalized by this war, will hold out longer than the United States, America, and the West.
We're still wondering about the mines in this strait. Are there mines? Do you really think there are mines? Donald Trump says the Iranians are going to help us remove them, etc. So far, we've only had the Iranian statements as proof.
Trump said he was tracking each of them individually, that he knew where they were, and that's possible. Then after that, they said there weren't any left. Then finally, there were up to 6,000 that had been deployed. So in fact, we don't really know. But whether there are 0, 1, or 100, we believe that the south of the strait is impassable. So no one dares to go. So we're forced to go off the Iranian coast where we're within range of Iranian ships, and that's what we saw today.
But wait, Xavier Teitelman, the Ukrainians themselves said they were able to help the Americans with this. Is that true?
But the Americans don't want that. The Americans don't want to lower themselves to accept help from the Ukrainians. In the field of air defense, the Ukrainians had proposed in
October, but they refused that.
They refused last October to let the Ukrainians help them with their air defense, especially to defend against Shahed drones. When the war began, Russians sent hundreds of Iranian drones daily over Ukraine, so Ukrainians learned to intercept them. Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, all the countries in the region, Qatar, asked the Ukrainians for help. The Americans did not agree.
Some claim the strait has nothing to do with the Black Sea, so Ukrainian aid isn't appropriate.
The conditions and employment levels would differ, but which country now can supply hundreds of naval drones for patrols? It's Ukraine. It's the only country that has an industry capable of producing dozens of naval drones per day that could patrol and could potentially collide with Iranian ships when they go out.
What would that mean in practice in the strait?
So, if we imagine putting mine detection sensors on these Ukrainian naval drones, you could easily carry out much more intense patrols than if you needed very large ships. If you imagine deploying surface drones ready to attack any Iranian ship that leaves the port, you have a constant presence at sea that a ship simply can't provide, especially since a ship has to stay hundreds of kilometers away because it puts itself in danger if it gets closer. If you send planes to carry out this type of mission, you put them within range of missiles, as we saw with the F-15 that was shot down and the F-35. So in the end, the Ukrainians, thanks to the system they've developed in the Black Sea, of course, they won't be able to do everything. But if they were asked if the United States were willing to swallow their pride and ask the Ukrainians, who know how to do it, it would actually be much easier for them.
Donald Trump, who is losing patience since he says in his latest statement that he will strike the energy infrastructures.
He has said it 4 times, maybe 10 times. So the problem is that the
Iranians, do they see that Donald Trump is losing patience here? The problem
is that he always loses patience. He has already lost patience many times, and always at the last moment, he backs down, he chickens out.
Trump always chickens out?
There you go. Trump always chickens out. And so the question now is to put yourself in the other person's shoes. You know, you always have to put yourself in the other person's place. The Iranians today, do they still take Trump seriously? Do they still take Trump seriously? And for me, I'm certain, I'm convinced that the Iranians will not capitulate under this kind of threat. They're ready to call their bluff.
But unfortunately, I think that Trump will do it. I think they will end up resuming their bombing. Against power plants, which would be an illegal order that would amount to a war crime, because we're talking about targets that are neither legitimate nor military. Destroying all the bridges, destroying all the civilian infrastructure, that doesn't correspond to a military necessity that would bring down the regime. But I'm sure that Trump will eventually give that order.
Some of these power plants are linked to Gulf countries.
No, but it means it's America's Götterdämmerung. It's the twilight of the gods. Because it obviously means that the Iranians will absolutely use all their means at the expense of the Gulf monarchies. It's obvious that if you destroy the power plant, I'll destroy your desalination plant. It's an absolute disaster. At that point, the world economy for some time will collapse. The Iranians have always shown that they always respond in kind. The same thing.
La loi du talion.
Exactement. They did it at the expense of the Gulf monarchies who are vulnerable.
Just one important point, it's that the Ukrainians, on the other hand, after the requests, the strategic partners who signed with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are now massively deploying air defense systems, especially the interceptors against Shahed drones, which have interception rates of around 95%.
Because it was mainly drones that had struck actually.
The ballistic missiles were intercepted at over 95% by the Gulf countries with Patriot missiles, and the Shahed drones were only intercepted at 60%. The Ukrainians managed to do that at 95%, so now they're massively deploying interceptors and jamming systems, and so potentially if Iran starts firing again, it won't be pleasant. Some will get through. Protected areas, especially refineries and freshwater plants, would now certainly be guarded by the Ukrainians.